Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming this evening. I appreciate you being here. Last week we looked at several ancient gates from Hazor to Ashkelon to even Jerusalem, looking at chapter 19 of Genesis where Lot is seated in the gate. We're going to read through Genesis chapter 19 here, but I want to look at the paper I handed you last week, which starts with, in the middle of the notes from last week, there's the book by Steve Collins right here, Excavating Sodom, and I've got a few things I want to read for you, the discovery of that gate, which includes Lean Rittmeyer coming down and helping oversee and excavate and kind of talk about some features they might be able to find, and they did, just like he talked about. And then I want to read through the rest of chapter 19 after read the first 3 or 4 verses. And then I've got another set of notes for you tonight that is just an article, a scientific article that's posted by Dr. Sylvia, Dr. Philip Sylvia, who was working with Collins. He's got a very scientific, and I've got a link to this article. It's very detailed, very scientific. I've got just one section of it right from the article about the human bones that were found there, and that goes up through page 3. That's copied right out of the article. But then on page 4, there's other details in that article I've simplified and dumbed down for me to understand so that we can see what they found there scientifically. Because they had, after looking at the scientists or the excavators and the archaeologists, Lean Rittmeyer finding the gate, they brought in a team of comet experts. 20 scientists came in to explore, examine, because what is this? This is a destructive layer. Was it like war? Like when we look at Lachish, you can see this is clearly the Assyrian destruction of Lachish. You can see the war, the arrowheads, the sling stones, the fire where they burnt the gate, where they can excavate. It's like a crime scene. This was the burning of Lachish by the Assyrians. Or was it an earthquake? Like, well, you can go somewhere and you can see this culture, this city ended because of an earthquake, and you can find human remains, but it's because of, it's the result of an earthquake. Or there could have been a fire burnt through the city. There's different ways, a tornado. But this Sodom, or Tel El Hammam, it's like, these temperatures are like 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's like what's taking place here? And it has to be a cosmic airburst, like a meteorite, something heading towards the earth that burst before it's coming through the atmosphere, and then that fireball of heat blasts up and burns everything on the surface. But that change of heat then causes a tidal wave, not a tidal wave, but of air, a very hot air burst that follows it, which is more wind than a tornado or hurricane, and just then blows debris like missiles right across the burn site. So at first it's just scorched, and then there's that pause, and then of all the missiles coming, of the bricks, the debris, the timber, that just blows everything across the city in that direction. And it's like, well, that's what we found. I mean, they found, and it would have been exploded right over the Dead Sea, which they find an unusual amount of salt. It's like, it's not in any other layer. It's just that this layer, it's just buried in salt. It's like, where'd this? It's like, oh my gosh! The direction it would have just took the Dead Sea water, evaporated the water, and the salt just buried it. And then you got, let's read it. All right, here we go. This is a great story, but I want you to see the facts. We got enough false information and the lies and deception and fantasy tales, but it's very exciting when we read a biblical account, and you can take this, archaeologically find it, and go, whoa, and then bring the science, the comet experts in, and go like, and there you have it. Well, here you go, chapter 19, verse 1. The 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we'll spend the night in the square. Verse 3, but he insisted so strongly that they did not go with him, and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Okay, that's the end of verse 3. That's the gate. That's why we spent all last week, because that's the gate. Now, that gate in Sodom, if we can look at this right here, and this is a very rough drawing, there's the lower city. Here's the upper city. This is a very rough drawing. Most cities, ancient cities, are like this. The high part is on the top of a hill. They build the city up here. Here's going to be the palace, and here's going to be the temple. This is the main part of the city. But then people come and start living in the suburbs. And they start living out in here. So this is the lower city. Now today it's a half-mile tall or a half-mile tall, just debris up on here. They found, and we looked at it last week, the city gate right about here with ramparts going around here. And so the city gate of the lower tell, you'd come in here, and then there'd be another gate going into the upper city. Lot is sitting in this gate right here. Now they have found that. Now there's a time, this wasn't excavated 20 years ago. This wasn't excavated. They've been working on it for about 20 years. It was just a tall or a tell. And they thought, this is a large city. Let's find out what's here. It's at the right place. Now, here we go. Do you have the notes from last week? If you do, that's nice. I'm on page, it's not even a page, it's page 190 of Collins' book. And I'm just going to read through it. I'm trying to go very fast because I hope this is, again, interesting for you. It's not the booklet. I gave you a gate booklet. It's not that. It's chapter... It looks like this, Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 through 3. Then there's some pictures of some gates in it, and I just gave you a separate copy. I might have just gave you a separate copy. There's one laying right there on the table. There's one left right there that's stapled to the notes. Okay, here we go. I'm going to begin on page 190 of this. It says, and on the southwest corner of the lower tell, evidence of an important tower was emerging under the direction of the excavators, Season 7 Jordanian coordinator. So again, if we looked at those last week, and I can't do this all night long, but the first thing, there'd be a tower. There'd be a tower, and there's going to be a tower on this side, and then there's going to be some kind of a chambers in here, where you're going to walk through here. So they are finding this corner. Now, they don't know what's here. Now, there would be towers around the city, like we talked about that in the wall. There would be towers, so you could have your military up here looking out, scouts or fighting from here. You find the tower, you measure over here, you find this corner, we found the tower. And so they think they found a tower. But if for some reason they get over here and they can't, it just disappears, it's like, wait a minute, there might be a tower over here, and if there's two towers, we may have found the city gate. And so they don't know that. This is all developing. This is Collins talking about it. Bottom of page 190, I've got it underlined. The sacred precinct and the tower and the other areas kept everyone busy for the coming week. But as he oversaw the work, Dr. Collins kept thinking about the contrasting bricks. There's two different colored bricks. He thinks Dr. Rittmeyer will know. He's on his way. He's going to come examine the site. When he comes, he'll know. Dutch-born Lean Rittmeyer is the world's leading expert on ancient architecture, and he is. He has studied every gateway, indeed drawn every type of ancient building, and he has, for nearly every important archaeological excavation in the southern Levant over the past 30 years. He was working with Benjamin Motzer in the 60s. He's a good friend of Dr. C's. Next page. In the early morning sunshine of February 14th, Lean Rittmeyer stood looking intently at the newly discovered reddish-brown mud bricks. He's looking right here at this area here. It's all buried yet. Keep brushing away along the face of the wall, he said to one of the volunteers. Within less than 2 minutes, a corner appeared, and sighs of anticipation rose from the other volunteers who were gathering around. Everyone knew Rittmeyer's reputation for almost a preternatural ability to anticipate the layout of buried ancient buildings, a skill honed by decades of excavation and drawing sites. He started running out his tape measure. The opposite wall face should be about here, in line with the passageway coming through the middle bronze 2 gate city wall. See, each of these would have like a gate going through the towers. Within a few minutes, the full width of the reddish-brown wall was exposed, more than 10 feet thick. Okay, now I'm going to go to page 192. Is that right? Yes, 192. 7 cubits, monumental. So they go, it's 7 cubits. He says, well, this is a monumental gate, which is what we looked at last week. Now, all they see is a corner, and they've measured some things off. The face of the opposing wall in line with the passage was already exposed. Lean pulled his tape measure across the space between what could be clearly seen as 2 reddish-brown walls and marked off 10 feet. Clear this off. The other corner is here. And it was. There was complete silence on the lower Tel al-Haman, down here by this gate. It's a massive tower, Lean said confidently, and that is not a postern gate. A postern gate, remember, that's where a citizen walks in by themselves. It's the monumental gate, pointing to the newly cleared entryway through the Middle Bronze II city wall. It's the entrance to this tower from inside the city. So this is the gate that Lot was sitting in. By the end of the 3rd day, the team had clarified the entire footprint and foundation of the recently discovered large tower. All they got is the tower so far. An enormous Middle Bronze Age II tower built against and over the old early Bronze Age city wall. Talks about how big it was. Bottom page 193. Now there's some pictures there that you can't really make sense of because they're copied. The footprint of the tower, not counting the thickness of the city wall, was an immense 31 by 46 feet. And according to Rittmeyer, such towers would typically rise higher than the city wall, in this case to as much as 45 feet above the plaza below. This isn't a regular defensive tower along the wall. It's too big, Rittmeyer said, and it's external and extending outward from the city wall. This must be a monumental tower flanking the main city gate. Then you got 194. He says, it's all about symmetry, Rittmeyer replied. Since there isn't another tower or penetration through the city wall to the left, then the main gate and opposing tower to this one should be to the right. He stepped off about 25 yards down the Middle Bronze city wall to the right of the tower. He's stepping off this way. And you've seen the towers we looked at Gezer and Ashkelon and Hatzar. So you could do the same thing. You say, oh, well, this is a tower. I'll just go this way. I'll find another tower. You're qualified now. You could have done that. No, I'm being facetious. But, you understand what he's doing. He stepped off about 25 yards down the Middle Bronze city wall to the right of the tower's base, which for the first time in nearly 4,000 years stood exposed to the sunlight. That should do it, he said. Clarify the wall from there to here. The main gate should be along this stretch. Now it goes on, and you can read that yourself. I don't want to keep reading. I do, but I don't want to get too boring here. I want to keep moving. The next thing I'm going to go is the very back page, because they have some setbacks. It's like things weren't exactly like they thought, but it ends up being like Lean Rittmeyer had said. I'm on page 197. It's at the very top. It says, but where's the pier on the other side? Something's missing. The workers moved carefully and the metal and bristles painstakingly. Suddenly, the top outside right corner stone wobbled and tipped. Something tipped out. They're brushing away dirt. Something falls out. Jeff bent over for a closer look. He held out an open hand. Let me see your trowel. He jammed the trowel down into the soil where the 18-inch boulder had been perched. It easily penetrated to the handle. Nothing but dirt is there. Just tumble, he said. Dr. C felt uncertain, but at once Jeff stood up, grinning widely. That isn't the corner, he chuckled. Then he pointed with the trowel 3 feet to the right. That's the corner. The 2-meter passageway had just re-widened to 2 feet 9 inches, or 2.9 meters. But before the crew's eyes, mirror image turns and dimensions revealed the symmetrical twin of the left pier. At last, it was certain. The width of the gateway was 2 meters, 6.5 feet, just what Dr. Rittmeyer had said it should be. He'd already gone back to Holland. This was the main passageway to the city gate. So what they were finding was they're right here trying to find this, and they're finding that the main gateway going through there, and they find it. So that's the discussion of that gate, and that would be the gate that we're looking at in chapter 19, verse 1 through 3, that Lot was sitting in when the angels came. Now I'm going to read the rest of the chapter just for dramatic purposes, and then we're going to read through the scientific notes that I've got here. Chapter 19, verse 4. The angels are at Lot's house. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, we're going to go through and teach through this, but I'll just read it for dramatic effect. All the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can," the NIV says, "have sex with them." Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, "No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I hate even reading this, doesn't even make sense. I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." "Get out of our way," they replied, and they said, "This fellow came here as an alien." Remember, he did. Alien, and now he wants to play the judge, which is suggestive that he has become some kind of a leader because he's sitting in the gateway when the angels come, and that's where the judges who help make decisions or clarify issues sit. "We'll treat you worse than them." They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. But the men, the angels, inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so that they could not find the door. The 2 men said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place." They are going to destroy Sodom, or Tel El Hammam. "The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it." They were on an investigative mission first to see if it was really as bad as they thought. That's why the Lord came down to see it. And indeed, they qualify for destruction. So Lot went out and spoke to his son-in-laws who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, "Hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city." But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away." Remember that NIV translation of that word, swept away, because when we read the notes, they were swept away. When the city is punished. So that's what's going to take place. It's going to be punished, and the people will be swept away. When he hesitated, what's going on here? The men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them, obviously. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives, don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away." So the mountains of Jordan would be further to the east. Mountains of Jordan. But Lot said to them, "No, my lords, please. Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have sworn great kindness to me in the sparing my life, or have shown great kindness to me by sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared." Now, as you read through the notes tonight, that city should have been destroyed. Scientifically, that city should have been destroyed also, because this is not like one selective city. It's the whole area is getting blasted, as you know, Sodom, Gomorrah, and the surrounding cities. He said to them, the angel said to him, "Very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of." Now, how they protected it, we don't know. "But flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." That is why the town was called Zoar. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. The sun was up. Then the Lord rained down, this is how the Bible describes it, the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain. That comes up in the scientific notes. The entire plain had to be overthrown, including all those living in the cities. It's going to tell you how many cities and villages were destroyed. And also the vegetation in the land. The salt is going to end civilization there for 300 to 600 years. It's going to become a desert for 300 to 600 years. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt, which is also interesting because I'm going to show you a picture of a bone that you can see it online better, that in the city it had salt remains on it. I mean, it's coming out of the salt, it's coming out of the Dead Sea. When the water blew out, it vaporized, and the salt just came down. And his wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. Early the next morning, Abram got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe and overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. All right, now, this paper, I want to hustle and get through this. I've got it in two parts. The first of all, at the very top of the page, you can see the link to the article. And I would suggest taking a look. It's like 70 pages long. It's a scientific article. And this first section, I just cut and pasted right out of the article. And you'll get a kind of sense of how scientific it is. It's on www.nature.com. And so it's not a Christian site. But there's that information. And that this section right here is about human bones in the destruction layer. You can click on this part of the article, and I wanted to see the human bones because I think that'd be the most dramatic thing to see. So I clicked on that, and that takes you to this part of this longer article, and it's right here. Now, before we look at that part, see, part of it talks about the human bones in the destructive layer. Now, we're not excavating the entire site. They have. In fact, I've got like I've told you before, and I've showed it to you before, I've got a jar handle from around 1000 BC. So it's in a higher destruction level, and it was just there. They've got plenty of them. It didn't need it, so a guy brought it to me and gave it to me from the site. But that was 1,000 years after this destruction. So that was after this destruction. There's 300 to 600 years of just death in the land, and then people started settling on it. In fact, this is where Moses camped at this location. He camped on this tell. There's nothing there. There's nothing. He just camped there, looking down into because you can see Jericho from this place. And from Jericho, you can see this place. You know, it's miles away, but because you're looking across the plain, you can see especially when the sky is right. And so, anyway, there's this part about the upper tall. That would be this part right here that they found. We'll look at that. And then the next page, page 2, the lower tall, the lower part of the city. And then on page 3, there's a picture of one of the bones. Now, there's microscopic pictures of it that I can't even begin to understand. But I thought this was a fun little picture right there because it's a rib bone, but it's salt-rich sediment is buried. It was instantly killed and buried, but salt just grabbed onto it. I mean, it's like, where did the salt come from? I mean, anyway, we know. Now, right here, then the bottom of that page 3, the discussion of human bones, it kind of talks about all the scientific information we just read. But what I want to do is go to page 4, and it's called Other Details from this article linked above. So this is like a summary of everything else that's in the article that you can go home and look at and check out yourself. It's written and overseen by Dr. Sylvia, Dr. Phil, and I showed you his book. It's a signed copy. I got it from him somehow. He gave it to me. I don't know how I got it. I can't remember how I got it. If he sent it to me, I don't know. Because sometimes people send me books, you know. Anyway, other details from this article. Number 1, bottom page 4, provides detailed forensic evidence that a cosmic airburst obliterated Tel El Hammam. Point 2, excavation team documented a massive 4.5 foot thick, 4.5 foot thick destruction layer beneath the surface of the artifact-filled half-mile-long mound. So they've got right here, this is a half-mile mound or tell. There's 4.5 feet of debris filled with artifacts, just buried. And that's what they're looking at. Usually these remaining mounds or tell or talls indicate the remains of a deliberate burning from, and they got to decide, how was this destroyed? How did this end? From a military conquest, or accidental burning due to human negligence, or due to an earthquake. But that could have ended all these. All those could be possible, and they found sites like this. But the evidence doesn't match a military invasion. It doesn't match a city fire. It doesn't match an earthquake. It doesn't match just being abandoned. It's like, what happened here? And that's why they called in this comet team. It's like, what do you think? It's point B, point 2B, it says the mound was caused by something other than a normal events. In 2014, after 15 field seasons of excavation and archaeology by Dr. Collins, here it is, the Comet Research Group, CRG, made up of 20 scientists, visited the site at Tel El Haman to investigate. So that there's pits are opened up, like they've already excavated down, and there's blocked off squares where this is what's in this square that they've used their brushes, and they're looking at the minerals, they're looking at the potsherds, they're looking at what they're finding, because we're saying we don't know what happened here. So the Comet team comes in. Point 4, the 40-foot tall or 4 to 5 story palace had been demolished. Up here, the palace, they've excavated the palace. They found it. It was demolished. The 13-foot thick mud brick defense wall, this going all the way around this brick wall, was blasted away. And you know this, but this is what they're going to say. Everything is going this direction. Everything is blasted this way, suddenly. And everything died instantly. Page 5. Here we go. We got more information on this coming. Point 6. Human skeletal remains showed fragmentation and extreme disarticulation. That means ripped apart, indicating the bodies had been violently ripped apart by the blast. Now, it could have been, people are just chopping bodies up. But that would be evidence. This is a war scene. This body's got, this bone is cracked in half with an axe, or this skull is crashed with a mallet. You can see, it's been ripped. Or they all died, and then animals came in and ate them. There's teeth mark on the bones or things, it's like, but it wasn't warfare. These people did not die of warfare. They didn't die of scavenger animals, or their bodies weren't moved. It's not a burial site. Point A, 6A, Dr. Ellen West of that Comet Research, whatever, he says, among more technical evidence, we discovered human bones that had been splattered by molten glass from the event. Okay, not people splattered with molten glass. Molten glass is glass that is hot, melted, it's being formed. Well, they're not necessarily using glass vessels. They're talking now about sand that's being heated up and forming into glass and then being splattered not on a person, but on a person's bone right as the person has died. So these bones were set in place at death or right after death. So all of a sudden you've got a person standing here, and the only thing left of them is a bone or bones that have been splattered against the wall. And as soon as they're splattered against the wall, they're splattered themselves with glass that sets on the bone, and then salt covers them. So this is not the Assyrians. The glass is indistinguishable from that found at ground zero after atomic explosions. I mean, this glass was formed by whatever blew the city up. These people were killed by the heat and pressure of an atomic-like explosion, but without any radiation. That's what one of the scientists says as he's looking at that bone. It's like, oh my gosh, This is like an atomic explosion that turns sand to glass, but without the radiation, but it splattered on the bone after the flesh was gone, but these people died instantly. So you're, in one moment you're alive, the next minute your body's flesh is blown apart, your bones are blown apart, ripped apart, and then glass lands on it that just got heated up from hot sand that became glass, and then you're covered up with salt. Like, how fast? Like, it's like, was it painful? We talk about decapitation. It's like, well, this might be a quicker way to go. Again, this is God's judgment. I would not want this. But I mean, it's not like, how long did they suffer? The heat experiments indicate the temperatures would have instantly exceeded, get this, 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit, 2,000 degrees Celsius, which is hot enough in our world. I had to find this information. I had to read this. It's not like I figured it out. That's hot enough to turn a truck into a molten pool of iron. Here's your truck, 3,000 degrees. It's a pool of just melted iron. The key finds: A, evidence for high temperature burning the city. Melted construction materials. And construction materials would be like the bricks, the blocks, the clay tile on the roofs. Because when that explosion takes place, that's the first. Not everything, it's not a fire. This is not necessarily a fire as much as it is a heat blast. So everything's going to get scorched on the top like the clay tiles. So melted construction materials. Minerals and materials subject to extreme high pressure and high temperatures. Human bone fragments, we're talking fragments, in a destruction layer. Here, point E, high salt content of the soil associated with the destruction and its implication for agriculture in the region. Meaning there's salt there where does salt come from? Again, here's your options. The city could possibly have been destroyed. They're going about this scientifically. Well, this could be war. This could be fire. It could be an earthquake. It could be a volcano. It could be lightning. Only one option explains all the features together, and that is a cosmic airburst caused by a nearby comet or meteor explosion that exploded near the northern end of the Dead Sea, a few miles southwest of Tel El Haman. So we would assume in your pictures in your mind, a meteor's coming, and as it enters the atmosphere, somewhere above the north end of the Dead Sea, it explodes because of the heat. The heat extends out and melts everything in this general area, blowing this direction, including blowing water and salt out of the Dead Sea up over this entire fertile plain. But the water, of course, would instantly vaporize, but the salt comes up like snow, except faster, like in a hurricane. It exploded near the northern end of the Dead Sea, a few miles southwest of Tal El Haman. The only plausible formation mechanism that can account for the entire range of evidence is a crater-forming impact or a cosmic airburst, most likely somewhat larger than the 22 megaton airburst at Tunguska in Siberia in 1908. That's something you can look up and study. There's something, and it leveled trees, it destroyed animals, and that was a comet came down, or a meteor came down and blew it. So we've got a little minor example of it, and it's been researched. Point 10, a cosmic airburst over the north end of the Dead Sea brought some level of destruction across, watch, the Jordan Valley. That's what chapter 19. It's not like God destroyed Sodom. The text says the whole valley, the plain was destroyed, the cities. And this says it would have leveled the whole Jordan Valley north to northeast. So going north, going this way, and going this way, coming from the north end of the Dead Sea. Northeast of the Dead Sea, destroying 15 other cities and 100 small villages, except Zoar. It doesn't say that. They didn't find Zoar. Making them uninhabitable for 300 to 600 years. Now that's the evidence, archaeological evidence, and that's the scientific results of what would have taken place. They found broken clay pottery or potsherds that had been subjected to such high temperatures. I brought these, and you guys can pass these around. These are potsherds I picked up. Here's one from Ashkelon right here. This is from Hatzor right here. And these are actually I picked these up off the ground. This looks like some kind of a jar handle I got better jar handles than this one, but just pass those around. Don't feel like they're special. But when they say potsherds or broken pottery, that's what they're talking about. And some of it would have been broken in the area. Some of it would have been broken that day. But what they found right here, they found broken clay potsherds, which is not unusual. That's everywhere. But that had been subjected to such high temperatures that it had melted and formed bubbles. So if you'd look at one of those, and that's been heated up in a kiln of some sort and became a pot. But now, after being a pot, it gets heated up so hot that it melts again and it bubbles because it's now liquefied. It had formed bubbles with no clear evidence of what could have produced such extreme high temperatures. So those are not from Sodom. Those are just from over in Israel. But that would have been melted again by those temperatures. And they're picking those up, they're looking at them just like you're looking at them going, wait a minute. This has been remelted. It has to be, 2,000 degrees to melt this to make it bubble. You can make it hot. You can put it in an oven, but you can't melt it, and you can't make it bubble. What made those things bubble and then harden like that again? Well, they found it right there. So they're looking at scientific evidence. Point 12, the debris in the destruction layer was unusual not only for its having been subjected to extremely high temperature, but also because it was thrown down in a specific direction. So all these things have been exposed to an extreme temperature, but after they've exposed to the extreme temperature, then comes that blast of wind that blows everything. So first of all, there'd be and everything on the surface is getting melted. Then after that explosion, now comes the air result of it, the wind. And it's going to blow it, well, let me see if it says it here, like missiles. It says, but also because it was thrown down in a specific direction. This includes the people, you see. First of all, they've got to face the heat, and then the wind, which is also as hot as the heat, and they find the remains of these people. What happened to these people? Thrown down in a specific direction from the southwest to the northeast. Southwest to northeast here in the city, indicating the destructive force originated in the air southwest of the city near the north end of the Dead Sea. Point 13, pottery and construction materials that had melted at temperatures of over 2,700 degrees was found. Inexplicable, here, watch this, inexplicable that we don't know how it happened. High salt content in the soil. At that destructive, then all of a sudden salt buried the whole thing. It's like, well, okay, I mean, that's not normal. Did it fall out of the sky? Did it come up out of the ground? Did the Assyrians throw it there? It's like, well, it's got to come from somewhere. It's got to come from the Dead Sea, the Salt Sea. It came up there. And then, of course, there's that salt coming down, which now you've got, well, look at that picture of that bone. We'll see it again. That's covered with salt. Well, Lot's wife turns and looks back, whatever that means. She just stops. Does she start running back into the destruction? Or did she stop just for a moment? I mean, was Lot standing here and his wife was standing here? I mean, what's that mean? We'll look and try and figure some stuff out. But somehow she gets covered up she doesn't get burnt, she doesn't get melted, she doesn't get heated up to 2,000 degrees, but she does get the fallout of the salt from the Dead Sea after the explosion, the wind, and then here comes the salt. And she got covered up with salt, just like this says. And again, there's salt on that whole layer. Point 15, the airburst would have caused this is the whole system. I've said it several times, but here it is in written form. The airburst, the comet, the meteor, would have caused a rapid succession of high temperature thermal pulse from the fireball. So there's going to be a thermal pulse coming from the fireball that melted exposed materials like clay roofing, mud bricks, pottery. So like the mud bricks would have been cooked. This was followed by a high temperature, not high velocity, hyper velocity blast wave, like from an atomic bomb, that demolished and pulverized mud brick walls, leveling the city. Okay, so that is what they found at this site. And when the angels say, we're going to destroy the city, it's all going to be swept away. When they said swept away, that is exactly what takes place. Now, for entertainment pleasure, we're going to go look at the destruction layer of the bones, because these are the people, what's left of the people. They would have. These are the people that were judged by God. Again, we're assuming that this is correctly locating the right place. I mean, this happened. This site is being excavated. You say, well, I don't believe that place is really there. It's really there. Now, you can say, I don't believe that place is really Sodom. That's you can leave that up. You can say, well, I think Sodom's just a story. It didn't really happen. Okay, that's fine. But this happened. I mean, we got. You can. Well, in our postmodern world, our post-truth world, you can say whatever you want to say. You can, you've heard it in media for years. But in the typical scientific excavation world, this place is there. We've got pictures of it. They've excavated it. So this is what they find here, and it sure looks like it's Sodom. Here's the bones. Page 1 of the notes for tonight. And this, you got the article is right there in www.nature.com. The upper tall. So in this area right here where the palace is and where the temple is. I'm sorry. This is the notes I had for tonight. The page, very first page, the notes I gave you tonight, page 1. I'm going to just read some of this. I've got it highlighted, so just good luck. If the Middle Bronze A2 destruction event at Tel El Haman was a sufficient magnitude and abruptness to be fatal for humans, inhabitants, as the evidence indicates, human remains should exist in this layer. So if this is really happening, there should be humans here. I mean, it'd be one thing, you excavate the whole site and there's no humans here. It's like, well, why did they leave? I mean, did they know the Assyrians were coming? Did they know the storm was coming? If this was so sudden, there should be remains of people here and there should be no burials. It should just be, and indeed, human skeletal remains of sufficient size to be positively identified were found in the upper ring road that encircled the upper tall. That's this upper tall right here. 2 human skulls were found about 20 centimeters apart, adjacent to a portion of the pelvis and a likely arm bone fragment. Now, you do not find any skeletons, like, someone laying down, like you excavate like a earthquake and a building or boulder falls, a guy, he's pinned down there, you move the boulder, like there's a skeleton just like it was. There's just fragments, there's bones, but it's like there's nobody like a skeleton like you see in biology class. They're like close together. The second skull fragment consisted only of the upper dentition and lower half of the right orbit. Only 2 of 3 rib fragments were found and no other long bones were recovered. So you understand, that's the remains of a person. You've got 3 rib bones and half of their skull, and there's some other little fragments of bones laying around, but they can't tell. They'll say it, right? But we don't know if those smaller fragments are small animals or shattered human bones. Now we know this is a human skull. We know these are 3 human ribs. We know this is part of an arm. But all these other little fragments, they could be, they could be a goat. We don't know. They're so fragmented. That's what happened to the people. The record indicates that most of the bones had been shattered into small pieces and mixed into a matrix of pulverized mud blocks or mud bricks. Next paragraph. These skeletons were found on the roadway around the upper tall. The road was 3 to 4 meters wide. The remains were found at a depth of about 4 meters below the modern surface. So they're about 4 meters below. So they've been there for 4,000 years. Well sealed, undisturbed beneath archaeological sterile strata. The bodies had been rapidly entombed by pulverized mud brick containing abundant ash and charcoal. No weapons were found in association with the skeletons. A lot of times you'll find an arrowhead, next to the chest bones or the rib bones, or you find, something. There's no weapons or evidence of damage by weapons, and neither body showed any indication of exposure to scavengers. Although humans can be mortally, the bones lack evidence of direct exposure to fire, except for extreme upper ends. So in other words, they didn't burn to death. Like, I'm burning. And then the bodies got burnt because it was like And so what you're going to find on the ends of certain bones is scorched marks on the ends of the bones, because they're blown apart, and then it's gone. It wasn't like, it's hot in here. It's like, no, it was hot, now it's not hot. It's just like we're all dead. Like, it wasn't a fire that burned on and on and on. So they didn't burn, they just got, heated up fast. We also searched for and found human bone fragments in the Pellis bulk sediment. That would be in the Pellis area. A bottom sentence. Dozens to hundreds of broken and disarticulated bone fragments have been found in each of the 100 squares, but these were too small to be conclusively identified as human or animal. So 100 squares. I'm not sure if you saw a picture, if I showed you a picture of like if they excavate down, they'll have like I don't even want to use a number because I don't know if it's 8 foot by 8 foot or 12 foot by 12 foot square. And this would be, Steve's and my square. And we just start working now. We got brushes here and we're working down here. We're finding things. And in this square. And then you guys have a square over here. And we got to document where everything we find in there. We don't just run around and treasure hunt. We're just looking for artifacts. It's like, that's what I would want to do. But we've got to scientifically excavate out. What's this? Just a broken cup. Well, document. And it's like, what's this? Oh, it's a golden ring, and then you write that out. But you're excavating out. But in 100 squares that they're excavating, they found bones in every square. But in every case, in 100 excavation squares, the bones were too fragmented it's probably humans. But they're just blown apart. I mean, the flesh is gone. The flesh just like the water of the Dead Sea vaporized, the flesh vaporized, and the bones just were shattered and laid there for 4,000 years. I mean, that's just crazy. And it's all blowing this way. If this is the wall, they hit the wall. I am not reading to you Genesis 19. I'm reading a scientific report about Paul L. Hammond, an archaeological site. Now, if that is Sodom, then these are the people that were killed in Genesis 19. But you can take Genesis 19 and set it over here and say, well, I think that's a myth. Okay, we're not studying Genesis 19. We're studying a scientific report on Paul L. Hammond. Sure sounds like Sodom. Yep, probably the source of the legend of Sodom. Okay, so understand, I'm not telling Bible stories here tonight. Both squares, lower tell. Now we're going down to the lower tall right down here. Both squares revealed a significant abundance of disarticulated and fragmented human skeletal remains. Again, you got to hear this. Disarticulated and fragmented skeletal remains. They're not finding skeletons. They're finding skeletons that have been ripped apart. And you're going to find some very odd angles here. In one square, 3 partial intact skeletons were found. Oh, we did find 3 partially intact skeletons. Oh, good. All bones observed were embedded in a loose debris matrix composed of pulverized mud brick, ash, and charcoal. There is no indication of intentional burial, scavenging, accidental death, violence, or battle damage. 2 osteologists, please feel free to correct me. What's that? Okay, thank you. I should have just went with that instead of trying to pronounce it. Yeah. 2 bone doctors examined the bones of 2 adults and 1 child. Disarticulation of the skeletons was generally severe. And for the adult skeletons, only leg bones were preserved. Now that would give you the impression they're standing here, and here comes the explosion. This half goes, and the only left in the building was the legs, because they hit the wall. The rest of the body, where's the rest of the body? Oh, it's on down, 200 miles that way. Again, it doesn't say that, it just says, no one came and picked them up. It happened that moment. Wherever it went at that moment. So if there's only 2 leg bones left here, the animals didn't come and drag off the top part. It was, like the angel said, swept away. For one skeleton, The ends of both femurs showed evidence of charring. Notice that, the ends. The remaining skeleton was represented by many fragmented bones found in the surrounding matrix. And matrix would be like you've got a block that you're excavating, or a square, and then you'd have ropes going across, little strings going across, so you got like a grid. Does that make sense? So you got a matrix over your square. General femurs, surrounding matrix. See if we make this, say this right. Metatarsal bones, and that's finger bones, right? What's metatarsal? Oh, okay. Metatarsal bones were abnormally hyperextended, which means the blast took the feet and extended them in an unnormal way. Hyperextension, meaning the joints were overstretched. So this event overstretched the bones of the feet. And the proximal phalanges, that's fingers, right? It's a joint. It's
the bone closest to the foot or to the knee.
Oh, okay, these. This.
Yeah, proximal.
Okay. It's nice to have a doctor here. Which is even more intimidating trying to pronounce the words. This is first semester. This is a first semester material. This guy's teaching. It's like, have him sit down. Just have someone I can read come up here. Anyway, so the lower finger bone right here, metatarsal bones were abnormally hyperextended, which I would assume they bend this way. So hyperextended would mean they were bent that way. And it's not like, what happened? Did an animal come and do that? It's just the explosion, and just everything just get twisted, mangled. Most of it's just shattered. But these two skeletons, they're still together, but everything's just being bent out of place. Just think that. The air, the fire burst, and then that air that followed was so ferocious that it took your fingers and just bent your fingers back like that. Where's your head? It's miles down the road. Were hyperextended, or joints were, and and the proximal phalanges were hyperflexed at almost 90 degrees to the metatarsals. So what does that mean? Okay, that's the foot is bent backwards. The right knee joint of one skeleton also was hyperextended. In a nearby child skeleton, the legs were hyperflexed backward and the knee joints were disarticulated. That means taken apart. Another skeleton was found buried in a crouching position, they saw it coming, with the hands raised to the face, a posture commonly adopted for protecting the head, as occurred in the volcano eruption at Pompeii. So there's someone that was crouching, they had time to react. Bones were also found in another square. It says average length was 5 millimeters. In another square that they're excavating, the average length, 5 millimeters, like this. You got the whole skeleton, and the biggest bone you got left is about 5 millimeters. The largest was a small rib bone, 4 by 47 millimeters. We also observed 3.5 meter long charred bone that had been splashed with metal glass. I refer to that. In one case, molten sediment had partially melted and mixed with the bone. So when the heat melts it or burns it up, consumes it, the blast then separates the people, and then the sand and other things melt and are fixated into the bone. They actually melt together with the bones. Abram got up the next morning and looked, and you could see smoke rising. It's like, really? In one case, the molten sediment had partially melted and mixed with the bone, flowed, and cooled in place. These bones also were associated with geochemical anomalies. The rib bone is visible, salt encrusted. Now that's what I've got right here. That's the picture I kept you right there at the top. That bone is the rib bone that is visibly salt encrusted. So after all of that takes place, then here comes the salt, which explains Lot's wife. Anomalously, high concentrations of salt were found only associated with the bones and sediment in the destruction layer and not in strata above or below. So it's not like this is there's a lot of salt in this area. There's no salt below it. There's no salt above it. But in this destruction layer, everything's covered up with salt. Now, when enemies would destroy a city or a territory, they'd sometimes pour salt on it to keep it from producing. But that's not what happened. This was not an army. This was an airburst over the Dead Sea that brought the salt up. The tin and silver nuggets are also similar to those observed in the surface of melted mud bricks in the palace that were found fused to melt glass in the temple complex and observed splashed across loose sediment. Now there's a whole other set. You can click over. I just clicked on the part about the bones, so I thought that'd be the most entertaining. But you could click on stuff and it talks about the different metals and how the metals would change forms or change the chemical conditions of the metals would change. Things were being formed, things were being destroyed by this heat. And that's just the metallurgy. The discussion of the human bones on page 3, and you can see that picture I showed you. This is going to work out perfect. A medical doctor who's a co-author of this paper, inspected the human bones and concluded that injuries occurred peri-mortem, which means at the time or near the time of death, meaning these weren't laying around for years. This all happened now, or now. I mean, it's like at the point of death, or, okay, now it happened, right after death. Including damage to the eye socket of one skull. We propose, now this is their conclusion, we propose that the individuals represented by the bones were violently torn apart. Now this is the scientific conclusion. These people were violently torn apart by a powerful airburst or impact, leaving only a few hand and foot bones still articulated and unbroken. It would not be possible to duplicate these injuries or disperse the bones as found in this layer by warfare or by accidental falls from a great height. Meaning what we see here, we cannot duplicate this. Like if you see a body like laying like, then he's like, well, okay, let's take it up to the top of the wall. Okay, you ready? We'll push a practice dummy down. Push the oh, look, they fell off the wall. Or, look, this guy's head is decapitated. It looks like there's a chip mark in one of the vertebrae. Well, let's try this. Hit it with an axe. Oh, looks like someone chopped his head off in battle. These, it's like, this is a crime scene we cannot reduplicate. We don't know what happened. And this is the scientists, after they've expanded, it's like, it's nothing we've seen before. And it's got to have 2,000 to 3,000 degrees temperature. It's got to happen. You got to be melting sand into glass while you're blasting the flesh off of the bones, blowing them in this same direction, and then the glass has to melt in with the bone and become part of it, and then you got to cover it all up with salt like, some kind of a breaded chicken. It's like, I've seen that before somewhere. Oh, you haven't. It's never happened. Unless you read Genesis 19. It says it would not be possible to duplicate these injuries and disperse the bones as found in this layer by warfare or accidental falls from a great height. The most severe known injuries to the human bodies result from impact of impact of airborne high velocity objects. So as that wind is coming, everything from the Dead Sea, if it be stones or if it be branches, if it be parts of other cities, it's coming across at thousands of miles an hour and just blowing them away. High velocity, such as during the explosions or tornadoes. Oh, I got one more page left here. Yeah, I got one more page and I'm done. The ground-hugging blast wave from an airburst would be laden with high-velocity missiles, including sand, gravel, pulverized mud brick, plaster, fragments, potsherds, broken branches, and shattered timbers. Current evidence suggests that the human mortality rate at Tel El Haman was very high, so that most likely none of the 8,000, they say there's about 8,000 people living, none of them survived. Based on the distribution of human bones on the upper and lower talls, from here and down here, in the two parts of the city, we propose that the force of the high-temperature, debris-laden, high-velocity blast wave from an airburst One incinerated and flayed their exposed flesh, decapitated and dismembered some individuals, shattered many bones into mostly centimeter-sized fragments, scattered their bones across several meters, buried the bones in the destruction layer, and charred or disintegrated any bones that were still exposed. In summary, although man-made explosions and atomic bombs can account for extreme range of damage to humans, they cannot be ruled. They can be ruled out because of the age of the site. In addition, there's no radiation. In addition, warfare, accidents, tornadoes be eliminated because they are incapable of causing such observed skeletal damage. The circumstances and conditions of the human bones and fragments suggest that at the moment of death, these individuals were going about normal activities inside the palace. They weren't prepared for war. They weren't hiding from a tornado or a storm. They're just going about their life, and all of a sudden, they're swept away. On the upper ring road and on the rampart above the road, where they were struck by a high-temperature thermal pulse followed by a hypervelocity blast wave from a catastrophic cosmic airburst. This event was most likely larger than the airburst at the Tunguska, Siberia in 1908, where 500 reindeer and several herds were blasted in the radius there and were killed, but suffered no disarticulation. They were killed, but their bodies were left dead. Where these guys, this was more intense, their bodies were, well, you read it again, just their flesh sheared off and then just shattered, which is, it kind of adds some, if I can say meat, adds some meat to Genesis 19. It's like, and then they all died there. It's like, oh my gosh. I mean, and we might be looking at the remains of Sodom right there. Next week, we'll read chapter 19 and start teaching through the verses. But I just think this is one of the most amazing things to be able to see, to read about, and to have scientific evidence of it. And then you begin to wonder, there's other locations they think Sodom could be, but they don't have this kind of evidence. Again, it's not a slam dunk. I read you the report. I read you Genesis 19. I think there's a correlation there. Dr. Collins thinks there's a correlation. Dr. Sylvia thinks there's a correlation. Lean Rittmeyer thinks right place, right time. So you've got, these aren't quacks. These are your best archaeologists, your best biblical scholars are saying, this is coming together. We think we found Sodom. And so I repeat that. Now, do I know for sure? No. We haven't found a sign that says, welcome to Sodom. But we sure find some evidence. It sounds like this was Sodom, and God visited them one day with 2 angels. I'll pray and we're done. Father, we do thank you for the chance to look into these things. We thank you for the evidence that you provided. We ask that it would encourage our faith, but it would also sober us to realize the seriousness of sin, the seriousness of offending you, and how holy you are and how precious we are that we can walk with you and you can lead and guide us. We do ask that we would do the things you've called us to. We do thank you again for the information in Scripture and the evidence you provided in archaeology and science to confirm your existence. And we do pray for our generation that their eyes might be open, that we would have a time of revival and a sensing of the Holy Spirit teaching and working in people's lives as they are drawn back to truth and back to reality. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hey, thank you very much for being here. Be skeptical. Go ahead.